Gazes.
Hi, heathens.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Unholy Trini-Tea. We are thrilled to be back with you, and we've been reading your comments, and we've talked about it before, so we're going to dive into a two-parter on purity culture.
Woohoo.
Yeah, woot.
I wasn't saying how we love it, how it's so pure and
the best kiss I ever had was when I
culture-y.
kissed dating goodbye. That was just the...
Oh my god.
Josh Harris, like, yeah.
Oh, man.
Wait, isn't Josh
Okay,
Harris out
so-
of, like, the evangelical space? Wasn't
Yes.
that the whole thing?
Okay,
I'm going to talk so
Hold
much
on,
shit
hold
about
on.
him today. It's going to be great.
me too. But I have to say this. So yes, Josh Harris is out of the evangelical church. Now here's the thing. So he obviously profited a whole bunch off of purity culture, off the I Kiss Dating Goodbye, whatever the other book was that he wrote, I can't remember. And I will say that he was very much a product of the evangelical church.
Yeah.
And because he was young and, I don't know, probably relatively good looking and yada yada, they really supported him and built him up and reinforced these things that they were teaching. And because he was making a whole bunch of money and fame off of it, I think that's a really hard thing to resist when you're younger. I'm not defending him because I am still fucked up. But now he's out, right? And so he has said that, like, his book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, was problematic and he doesn't stand by it and blah, 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 blah. But, but he tried to start selling a deconstruction course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't even know exactly what, I think it was like a course. It's like a 6-week thing, or
It was
you
a
get
course.
one-on-one
You
coaching or
purchased, like,
something.
lectures from him where he was just, like,
And it was like
presenting.
$600.
It's like, hey,
Yeah,
will
or
you
something
buy
like
the
that.
antidote from me for the virus I gave you?
Buddy, yeah. Like, you cannot be both the illness and the cure.
And he knew he was in the
Um,
wrong. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of audience was familiar with what happened, but he knew he was in the wrong because he even preemptively made it so that anybody who was harmed by his past work, his books, and purity culture
Right.
would get the course for free. So for him to even go out and sell it and then turn around and say, "Oh, but anyone I hurt can get into it for free," is like he knew he was in the wrong or in the weird space to be asking for money for
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah.
it just
felt
it's a disconnect.
repentance in a weird way, but like, how can I repent but make a capitalism out of it?
Yeah.
Make a capitalism.
Which I
How can I
don't
make
blame
capitalism?
anyone else for, and I want to be clear with that. Like, if we were to start a Patreon, like, power to us, but, like, specifically him to, like, step
Give
into
me
a space
money.
that's not necessarily his, where he needs to be learning
Yeah.
from other people,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
to act like he's directing it. Like, if Joe Lumen, I can never say her last name, Joe Lumen? Joe Lumen, if she were to create a course and charge money for it, I would sign up tomorrow.
Immediately.
Like, hell yes. But, yeah, we're just
It's
against
like
certain
anti-racist
people profiting off of certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
so like for today's episode, everyone listening, what we're gonna do is next week we're gonna talk about the history of purity culture and all the nitty gritty and the ugly in the dirt. But a lot of you, the reason you want to talk about it is because you've been affected by it. So what we're going to do is give you a little bit of access to our stories and tell you how we've been affected by it and what our experiences have been. And perhaps, and we all function in very different ways in response to our history of sexuality and our present life. And we may not divulge all of that, but what we are going to do is talk about our experiences today. So strap in. We're going to talk about purity culture.
Yes, if you are looking for
Yay.
a casual chat, just bringing up some past deep traumas, this is the episode for you. So please stay tuned and get your mind in order, because if you want to leave now, because it's going to be triggering to some people, that's totally fine. We get you. That's your discretionary warning now. I know some people are at different stages of the deconstruction, and purity culture is a big one for some people. So,
Yes.
thank you for staying with us, and yeah, who wants to start? What do you want to talk about?
Away we go.
So I didn't know I was being raised up in a structure that made sex complicated until like middle school. No, Yeah, middle school going into high school. That's when I realized, like, oh, this is getting weird. Because I started being invited to this thing called TCTC. It happens in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It's Tennessee Christian Teen Convention. Thousands, yeah. So thousands of teens from all over Tennessee and outside of Tennessee are brought to this little convention in East Tennessee where they learn about a lot of things.
Mostly sex.
I heard some of the weirdest sex moves in the guy talk. No, this happened.
Wait, sex moves?
Sex moves.
Like so what they tried to do is they prided themselves on being up with the youths. And so like
hip to the lingo?
Like they would use like very niche porn terms from stage. Like that's the first time I heard an adult man use the word MILF outside of pornography. Like it was like, see, you guys know what that means. You got, and it's like, so you got to repent. Like that was a whole thing. I mean, like, oh my gosh, all the memories are coming back. There was these sessions that were like all girl sessions, all guy sessions, where they separated the groups. And there was this video that we need to find, and we got called "Beating the Bunny," which is a pun, obviously, for masturbation. But
no,
beating the bunny. So the entire short film was about this the guy who thought he was a sex addict, and by sex addict, he was the preacher's kid who also watched porn sometimes, and he would talk, and he was friends with the overweight goth girl in the church, because she also watched porn, and that was their connection point. Is their sin struggle? But they made it very clear in the film that obviously he wouldn't be attracted to her. Like that was like a whole plot point. And
I found it. Sorry,
you found it. It exists.
Yeah, 2005 is a short film. It opened on IMDb, but it will not give it to me on YouTube. So I don't know if they removed it.
In that film, nobody was giving it to anyone, so it's. But my favorite part of this film, and then I'll stop because I know this is cringe, but my favorite part of this film is when this guy was just like, I just wish I could talk about it, because the entire thing was just like, I wish I could just talk about my sin and be honest about my struggles, and that was like this whole thing. And his mom was being weird in front of one of the elders, like just like really snooty or whatever. And he turned to his mom and was like, "Did you know that I struggle with pornography and masturbation?" in front of the elder, and it was hysterical. It was one of the funniest things I have ever seen in any movie then and since.
Oh gosh.
And it was. And apparently there's a similar film for the women about avoiding masturbation. Also my cousin was sitting right beside me the entire time. So male bonding.
I can't with that. So not only are we sex shaming, body shaming, fat shaming,
Kink shaming with the MILFs.
Yep.
Kink shaming. Yeah, not only all of those things, we're also just incredibly creepy and unrealistic, Roger.
I was 12, 13.
12.
I might have been 14. I might have been 14.
I was thinking about this when you guys said, like, where do you want to start? And I was thinking, well, where did it start for me, right? When did I start getting taught about this? And as a woman, or female identifying person, I guess, when I was growing up, it's like, I don't even remember when the start of being sexualized was. It was literally just like always a thing that existed for me. Now, part of that is, and I have shared this before, so it's fine, is I was molested as a small child, and I didn't understand that was sexualization at that point. But it definitely gave me like weird feelings around my body. And then as I got older, and by older, I think I was 5 when that happened. So by older, like 8, I was starting to be told by my parents, that like to be wary of men, to cover up, to do all of those things, because at that point we had already become a part of the church. And so everything was very much based around being modest and making sure you don't make your brother in Christ stumble. But my brother in Christ were like adult men,
Right.
right? Like no one's worrying about an 8-year-old boy stumbling.
Right.
I mean, usually that happens once you guess, I guess, sorry, that happens once you get into like, I guess, middle or high school, and then it starts being to like cover your shoulders, you know, dress code bullshit. But it's just so weird to think back and imagine that young girls are being sexualized from such a young age, and it's all the pressure is put on them to prevent men, grown men, from sexualizing children. Yeah, like,
Can I ask a question? And this is
Hi.
personal, you don't have to answer it. But did
Sure.
your parents know that you were being abused?
Oh, I told them.
Okay.
And because I was 5 and like didn't quite have the words for it, I
Yeah.
just told them whatever I told them. So it was being done at my babysitter's house, and so my parents basically took me to my babysitter and told me to tell my babysitter what I had told them, and I just shut down
No.
because I was 5.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, 'cause I
And
only
so I
ask
just
that
kept
because I feel
going
like
to the
parents
babysitter.
need to, especially if they know that their kid's been in any kind of SA environment, there needs to be an entirely different approach with a conversation of purity culture. And
Oh,
so I was
God, yeah.
hoping that they didn't know. I know that sounds stupid, but I was hoping they didn't know, and then they weren't turning around and still putting the purity culture blame on you because they realized, like, oh, when we're talking about, like, you're dirty for being sexual or whatever, like, that they would have some kind of nuance and realize that it wasn't your fault that you were sexualized. But
Yeah.
it makes me feel
Well, like,
worse that they
when
knew.
I
I'm
got
sorry.
older, well, thank you. When I got older, I like brought it up again, like, hey, I told y'all something was going on and you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, why not? And they were like, well, you, like, when we took you to the babysitter, you said, like, no, it really wasn't happening, basically, or you didn't want to talk or whatever. Yeah, because I was 5.
It's not your job to
Like,
confront your
exactly,
abuser,
like,
especially
also,
at 5.
I didn't
What?
even have language
No.
for it, right? Like, I didn't know what was happening. Well, to be fair, it wasn't my babysitter. It was somebody else, but
Still.
at the babysitter's house. Yeah. Like, I didn't even know what was happening to me, so, like, putting it into words was hard enough.
Yeah.
And then being like, okay, tell this adult what's happening. Like, I told you guys. Like,
Like,
That's
yeah,
atrocious.
it was a mess. Yeah. And they're like, oh, sorry, we didn't know. Like, no, you did know because I told you. You just decided that like, how would I even make that up? Like, I was 5,
Yeah.
right? Anyway,
like,
good times.
like I have a 5-year-old right now, and the imaginative play she does is like, I'm going to make my Play-Doh have into monsters and they'll have babies. Like that's imagination.
Yeah.
And I cannot,
Yeah.
I can't even picture a world where I could put, where not only where she would have to tell me something like that, but all that I'd put it on her to deal. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know. It's not okay, but I have been in therapy for a long time for many a reason, so I have been able to work through a lot of it. But it definitely made going through purity culture even more difficult, and then coming out the other side and trying to navigate sexuality in a healthy way, like, so hard.
Yeah. I imagine.
But
So,
I guess, when did it start for y'all?
well, I have plenty to say on that, but I don't want to interrupt you, Jesus. You haven't really got a chance to share yet. Do you have something you want to share?
Well, I was just going to say it's pretty similar over here to Jessica's, just because I think we talked about this in a past episode, maybe even the sex episode. I'm not entirely sure, but I had a similar experience where I was also molested at 5. So as compared to your experience, thankfully, they believed my cousin and then me whenever I came into that conversation. So I didn't have to deal with that same level of defending myself or expectation to, because they definitely did step in and, police were involved, all that jazz. But where it transfers for me into purity culture is I'm not a woman, so I wasn't made to feel as if I were somehow defiled or somehow less than. But very much being in the arena and in the conversation in purity culture, I did feel like it didn't apply to me. And I think that's what I brought up the last episode too, is that I, being already sexualized or whatever, took that to mean that I was sexually active somehow, and that I'd already experienced these acts, and therefore I wasn't pure, or that I wasn't a virgin in whatever sense. And so whenever these conversations were happening about like, keep yourself pure, it was like, well, that's not me, because I'm already a little damaged. But so I always kind of felt left out of that conversation, and already felt like I didn't feel dirty, because I also went to therapy and did a lot of work when I was younger, but I didn't feel dirty. I didn't feel like it was my fault. I just felt like I wasn't a pure or whole package to present. But even with that said, it was still very pushed on us as a congregation or different youth groups I was in, or we went to conferences to like acquire the fire and all that bull. So I made
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, God. Acquire the fire.
Yeah.
Acquire the fire everywhere
worst.
except in your loins.
Exactly.
The worst. Yeah.
So I made like a recommitment, even though I didn't feel that way throughout like all the sermons and stuff. When I did get older, when I was in teenage years and puberty, I did make a commitment, even though I didn't feel like I was truly a virgin. I made a commitment to not have any sexual intercourse with anybody until I was married. And a lot of that came from me being gay, because here I am being told that like gay sex is this thing, and of course gay men are overly sexualized, where they're like all they want to do is bone. So I was like, well, I'm different because I'm gonna wait till marriage, and I thought that kind of like balanced out the sin of homosexuality, because I was like, well, if I could do this heteronormative thing and get married and then not have sex until I'm married, that will make up for the being attracted to guys part. So
Like,
while everyone else is out here having
you-
random sex, I will be pure, and then my one sin will be that it's with a man. If that makes sense.
So your plan was always to marry a man.
Yeah. In my teenage
got
years,
it.
I was very much already on the other side of like, you know, ex-gay therapy, and I had already done that for a year. And so my entire plan was to do the whole like meet a man, get married. I had already kissed a man at that point, I guess, but I had no other like sexual interaction outside of the molestation. So I was like, we're gonna not be a statistic where, you know, go out, have a pride parade, gay sex orgy, show them wrong. But yeah, that fell out of the window when I was like date raped, kind of, and then I was like, it's all thrown away now, so might as well just have sex like a regular teenager.
Yeah, man. So I'm sorry, I'm smile and I like don't know what to do with my face.
You're fine.
So just
You know what just
I'm not,
came
like,
to
it's
me?
not like
What just came to me is I was already out of the church, and that being a virgin thing was still the one thing I held on to after I had deconstructed out. So I stopped going to church primarily when I was about 15, maybe even 16. And I guess I didn't write off everything as much as I thought I did. Because even at that 16, 17-year-old age, I was still very much holding on to, I'm going to get married to a man and I'm going to save myself for him. Even though I'd already pushed away a lot of the doctrine of the church. And especially like, you know, them telling me that being gay is bad. For some reason, the one thing that I held on to is purity culture. And I feel like it's a very common occurrence for people to be able to get rid of everything else and still hold these weird values about them and their relation to sex or their worth.
Well, I think that part of that has to do with this sort of cultural idea that you're going to find one person and they're going to be your true love, and you know you're going to have a fairy tale and you're going to be together until you die, and it's, you know, yada yada yada. And so in a way those two things overlap, and so you sort of start to think, well, if I'm going to meet the one, might as well wait. And I think one thing that stuck with me that now I'm like, this is silly, but was, they would say things like, well, if you're not dating to get married, then like, what's the point? And at the time I was like, yeah, totally makes sense. And as I've gotten further and further away from that, it's like, yeah, I don't even want to get married. And the point of dating isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be marriage.
Right.
It could just be because you enjoy the other person. um, so I just think there's some cultural overlap between sort of what society tells you about romantic relationships and then what you hear in the church. I think they're just said in slightly different ways. So it's really easy to sort of hold on to that because it's reinforced in sort of more subtle ways. I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things that has came out of maybe evangelical spaces or, even colonial spaces that's just permeated our society as a whole, where you have that nuclear family aspect and you have that prom king and queen to childhood sweetheart to first time and first child pipeline that is advertised throughout media and throughout, I don't know, everywhere. It's starting to change a little bit, but especially in the 90s where purity culture was still very much at the forefront. It was also affecting things like media. Now you have things like Euphoria where all the teenagers are having sex and it's a little bit of a different world. But
yeah.
What's your story, Andrew?
Honestly, I don't think I had realized until we started this episode how much I have to unpack on this topic. There's so much. I think so for our age bracket, I think that there's this really weird intersection between social media starting, purity culture existing within churches, and the parenting style of treating your children like little adults. And how all three of those interact in a really unhealthy way in most cases. Like, first of all, treating your children as little adults is dangerous to begin with because you are introducing nuanced conversation to children that are not prepared to deal with it yet. And including about many things, including sex. Now, you pair that with something like purity culture, if you're willing to talk about adult sex stuff explicitly with children and expect those children to act as you would expect the best of adults. When adults rarely pull off the average of what you expect of adults. You take that and pair it with social media where out of nowhere we had LimeWire and we had porn.
Yeah, we did.
Like, there was so much porn that there was... They tried to do a study in Sicily on the effects of porn, and they needed a control group of men that had never been exposed to it, and they couldn't do the experiment because they literally could not find a big enough group of men that haven't been exposed to porn. They couldn't study it. That's how much porn there was overnight in the world. And,
I believe
so, it. Like, it isn't until, I think in the past 5 years, we've done actual meaningful study around pornography and like what that does to people, and both by churches that have an agenda and within legitimate like psychology and media work. But I was introduced to overtly sexual themes and reality at a very, very young age as if it was normal. I remember, and it was small things like I was allowed to watch whatever I wanted to on television. And so I got exposed to like pornography and late night television and the weirdness that happens on television and the weirdness that happens in movies with like really adult themes. In like
Titanic.
like in 4th or 5th grade, I remember just like dealing with this like burden of sexual knowledge. But not necessarily that being associated with who I am, just like this exposure that I didn't know what to do with. That had a weird crossover with like wrestling because that is an incredibly sexual group of young men. And that's odd in its own way. Like I remember...
Wait, like pro wrestling or like wrestling at your school?
The sport that I did growing up was wrestling. I wrestled. I wrestled the 3 styles that people do in the United States for more than 9 years, from 5th grade up through my first semester of college. Well, you can barely count that first semester of college. So 5th through 12th grade.
I feel like that makes sense. You put a whole bunch of pubescent boys together and ask them to touch each other. It's probably going to grow inherently sexual at some
In
point.
spandex?
Yeah.
I've always said that wrestling is so homoerotic.
It is.
And that's fine. But, like, I watched a couple wrestling tournaments and I was like, that man has his head, like, in that other man's crotch.
I mean,
like, I don't even...
just the names of some of the wrestling moves. High crotch, checking the oil, Saturday Night Ride, banana split.
Nope.
I could go on. So take patriarchy.
I should have done wrestling in high school. I'm kicking myself. I missed out.
Like, there's a reason I'm very comfortable with myself. I mean, my sport was put on the most revealing thing you could wear during puberty and manhandle someone in front of an audience. Like, that was what I did. So I'm just like, I could be naked in front of the president right now and it'd be fine. So it's just, but take that sport and pair it with a homophobic patriarchal structure, and it is this cesspool of toxic sexual ideas. I mean, guys that would get together as early as like 5th and 6th grade, and like all of them would like watch porn together, and it was just like it was so weird, and I was not ready.
We did that, and I wasn't in wrestling, so I think that just might be a guy thing.
Well, I don't know what it was.
I would say that's a guy thing, because I've heard from a lot of men or guys that I knew, and I was like, y'all are so fucking weird.
I had a gay
like,
friend,
are y'all
and we'd
just
get
sitting there
together
with
and
your
we'd watch
dicks out?
straight
Like, I
porn
don't
to
know.
convince each other that we were straight. Like, it was almost like a performative action of like, yeah, I like that girl's boobs, and be like, oh yeah, well, I like her hair. Her hair's brunettes are hot. Like, just going back and forth trying to trump each other, like how hot it was to watch this girl.
That's
Meanwhile,
going on
that's
downstairs.
ridiculous. But
Sorry.
I think most of my like sexual history can be marked with I wasn't ready, and then I had to deal with like sexual conflict within myself. Like there's this person on TikTok named Mending Me, Me, and her language has really put into focus for me that so many of my early sexual experiences were coercive, where I was told not only by the men around me but also by the woman that was in front of me that I had to do this to be a man. Like that was just like, why wouldn't you take this opportunity? And I remember just regretting most of my early sexual experiences because one, I was fighting tooth and nail to prove that I was straight when I'm not. And two, I was fighting a patriarchal culture that told me that this is something I was supposed to want at all times when I wasn't ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I don't know, I can't speak for Andrew, but I think that certainly between Jagazis and I, like, oftentimes we're largely, or we'll go for long stretches without really being incredibly interested in sex. And that's not to say that, like, if the opportunity arose, like, it wouldn't be worth taking, but it's not, I think there are some people who really seek it quite often and others that could live without it. And I think largely I fall into that category, but it is interesting how our societal standards tell men that in order to be manly, like, you should really just be ready and wanting it at all times. And I think that's really toxic.
It's bizarre to me, and I think that's why it took me so long to even, I guess, not unpack, like, where I may be on the asexual spectrum, but, like, really figure out what that meant for me. And because, like, it's so pervasive, and it's not even just, like, in the purity culture experience, it's also just in media, you know, where, like, it's just, like, everything you turn on, it's like, wake up, try to find a girl to bang is how they present it. And it's like, do whatever you can to get the sex. Like, take her on a date, spend $100,000, make sure you buy her shoes. It's just like everything is, the end goal is get a car, get a job so you can have sex. Go outside, look good so you can have sex. Make sure that you don't go to this coffee store, go to that coffee store so you can have sex. It's like, It's
So,
everything. And I'm like, am I
yeah.
crazy? Am I broken? Or is that like how everyone thinks? And I'm sure it's more nuanced than this, but then I found out like for a large part, it's not just a media push. Like you talk to certain guys and that is very much how they think. And even like in
Yeah.
my gay circles, you know, I talk to a couple of my friends and they're very much like that. And I'm like, so
Yeah.
it's not just the media at all times. Sometimes it's just a spectrum of people who actually do
Yeah.
require that. But for you to try to
Yeah.
perform or live up, like Andrew was saying, like the expectation from other people to fit yourself into that same drive or competition of trying to get and earn sex, for them to push that on you when that's not your priority or your same libido or whatever, is where it gets very convoluted and
Yeah.
needs to be broken apart. It shouldn't be a society expectation, even if there's certain guys who do have that kind of running libido. It shouldn't be put into the media as if that's a normal man, and it shouldn't be equated with masculinity. And
Well,
yeah,
so there was this guy that I knew, not biblically. We were just friends, and there's a guy that I knew who I will say that looking back, I definitely had a big crush on him, and that was a huge like tension there that I never took time to address. But he was just kind of this all-star everything. He could sing, he could dance, he could act. He was handsome, he was symmetrical, he was charming, and I have never met anyone that has more sex in my life than this guy. There was this one summer after we graduated high school where he slept with 76 women during that summer.
nice.
And
Ew.
he just
I hope he got tested like every day.
he's been tested, and I do not know what's going on there. I'm pretty sure he's clean. How, I have no idea, but maybe he's immune. But it was, I can think of so many moments where like he was kind of this like object of like masculinity in so many circles that I ran in early on, because he was this handsome, athletic, artistic jock. And one of the ways he performed his masculinity was just this perpetual sexual conquest. And that was the undertone of most of my male friends growing up. It's just like the way that we know who we are is sexual conquest. And it's not until now, like I've been married for 6 years, that I can say the majority, we're talking about sex drive. I have a very high sex drive, but the majority of the times that I've associated the idea of sex, it has exclusively been because that's what I deserve. That's what I've been taught, that I deserve it.
Yeah.
That I'm supposed to want it. And a life without it is proof that something's broken. And so like the majority of the time that I've ever pursued sex has almost never been tied to anything like a partnership. Like that's until I met my wife. Like that's and that might sound crazy, but that's what I was taught growing up.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I can't speak to what it's like for all men or gay men specifically, but the commodification of women, I think, is a real issue, because women, like you said, are seen as conquest. They're not seen as equals. They're not seen as someone to be valued or loved or respected. They're seen as a prize to win and then move on from. And it's a really brutal cycle. And it's not healthy for either side. But I think like part of this discussion, I'm not even sure, is that like all men necessarily, not okay, it's not all men, that some men that may even seem to have a very high sex drive actually have that high of a sex drive, so much as they're seeking status or seeking recognition or seeking to prove their masculinity or something like that. And the way that they do that is by objectifying, commodifying, and dehumanizing women, because they just see them as this, as a conquest, as a prize. And again, like, that's not everybody, but it is certainly something I've noticed because I am a woman and because I am a semi-conventionally attractive women, so I run into a lot of men that it just seems like this is their end goal, and I'm like, sorry.
I just need you to
And
know what
because I
your
have a lot of
comment
female
section is going to
friends.
look like now that you called yourself a semi-attractive woman. When I know how many men call you their queen.
Yeah.
Can I just address that plainly? And I'm not coming after any of y'all dudes. Like you call her whatever she's okay with you calling her. But you called yourself somewhat attractive, and you have been called royalty by so many men. So now that we all have acknowledged that on a
Bye.
Please continue.
No, that's really all I have to say is that, like, I've had the experience of coming into contact with many men, and while I've certainly met good men, they are few and far between, and all of the people in between those men, it's very much this, like, hit it and quit it mentality, because they're not associating sex, like you said, with a partnership or something that you do to get any kind of emotional validation or connection or anything like that. And I know there's this whole stereotype where it's like women are more emotional about sex and men just want to get their dick wet, basically.
That's so dumb.
It is dumb, and it's also really unhealthy to teach men that they shouldn't have an emotional connection to sex. Like, and I know that I'm sure there are lots of men that can just hit it and quit it, but I think that disconnect emotionally when you're having sex is part of the problem. Like, I'm not here to say that casual sex is bad. Have as much as you want, so long as both people are in agreement that this is just something you're doing for fun.
Yeah.
And
Don't
one
make it a
party is not, like,
game.
emotionally invested. Exactly, because a lot of times what happens is men, I don't even want to say trick, but they play a role that they know will get a woman in bed.
Yeah.
So they act interested, they act emotionally invested, they play this role, and then they sleep with the woman, and then they're like, nah, bye. Because they won.
Yep.
So there's so much to talk about here, and like this is where I think, you know, toxic masculinity and patriarchy intersect with purity culture in a really strange way, at least from a male's perspective, like what it does to men and how it teaches men to think about themselves and women. Because on one end, we have, you know, this toxic masculine world that teaches you what masculinity is by saying it is the opposite of whatever is feminine. Like, it's never quantified in any other way. Mm-hmm. How do you run? Not like a girl. How do you hit? Not like a girl. What emotions are good? Whichever ones are not girly. And girly is also always associated with gay. And gay is also associated with bad. And that's a whole nother thing. So, like, I remember growing up, like, being both very girly and very gay about most things. Like, almost all the things I love are stereotypically girly and gay. And being told that throughout my life, I know beyond the shadow of doubt that I was taught to not like women. Because I wasn't supposed to be like them. I wasn't supposed to be friends with them. I wasn't supposed to be similar to them in any kind of way, because however a woman isn't worth being like.
Yeah.
Can I hop in here just really quick? So I saw a TikTok the other day, and I cannot remember this person's name, and I'm sorry, but she made this really poignant point. Which is basically what you just said, is that men or boys are not socialized to be anything. They're socialized to not be something.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be like a woman or a girl in any way. So, like, emotional, that's for girls. Like you said, how do you run? Not like a girl. How do you dress? Not like a girl. What is your favorite color? Whatever is not like your girl's favorite color. Like, just all of those things, right? And so you come to associate, like, if you're constantly being told not to be something, you begin to take that in as like, well, it must be bad for me to be that thing. And when you combine that with the fact that all the way back through time, women have been treated as the weaker sex, honestly, the less moral sex at times, the less intelligent sex, just like all of these things. Even we've talked before about if you go all the way back to Roman history, women were seen as obviously second class, but also as morally inferior, as being weaker minded, as being like the more likely to cause people to sin or to make bad decisions or to not act in an upright way. And that has carried over a lot. And we've certainly made progress, but we're still teaching little boys that to be like a woman is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And because we've also told, culturally, we've decided that being gay is also being feminine, which, like, not necessarily. Then we've also associated being gay with being bad. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I know the TikTok you're talking about too, but the whole entire point is men hate women. And they've been
Nobody
raised to hate
women more
women.
than straight men.
Yeah. Their attraction to women isn't because they respect them. It's because, as we've discussed, they're commodified and it's a game. So they want to win women, but they don't like women because they've been taught that women and women things are bad and or not valuable. So, like, I mean, even if you look at, like, some stupid vapid excuse, like women doing their makeup, you know, guys, obviously some of them will like makeup in general, just the look of it, but then they still don't see it as, like, you know, an art or putting time into it. They think it's stupid. You're wasting money. But at the same time, like, they don't think you're attractive without it necessarily. But then they'll turn around and say, oh, I love when women don't wear makeup. But again, not realizing, I mean, it's a bad example for what I wanted to get at. But the whole entire point being, like, they hate it because it's feminine, and yet they'll partake in it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to make, like, 3 points of just about, like, just men in general, just for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
One being, the reason that so many men are bad at talking to women is because we're told not to find any interest in anything that is considered womanly. Yeah. And so, like, the reason that, so ladies, if you're with a men, if you're with a man and he just sucks at talking, it's because he was literally taught to hate everything about you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how can there's a psychological wall there where he can, and so, like, if you know men that they made their entire personality as a kid about camouflage or hunting or fishing or cars, that was literally a dying boy latching on to wreckage in a storm. It was the only safe thing that he could be without being ostracized and hated. We got to cut those men slack. That was their only way to survive. My cousins that became car guys just so they wouldn't have to talk about anything else, so that they wouldn't have to be shamed, so that they could talk shit about other guys and not be the target. Like, I didn't do that mostly because I was stupid. That would have been an easier way of being. I could have just, like, had an easier life.
Sure.
We're glad you didn't do that.
Well, thank you. Like, looking back, basically everything I enjoyed involved spandex, dancing, theater, wrestling.
I mean, what's the problem?
There wasn't
What's
any.
the problem,
I have fantastic legs, but it was.
Show us. Just kidding.
Well, my before and afters will be up in,
Andrew.
like, 3 months. So, but
No, and I agree with you because, I mean, I should have taken the easy route too, but I think that the queer side of us won't allow us to ever do that because, like, no matter what you do, it still comes out gay. Like, if I were to turn the camouflage and car route, I would be the gayest damn gasket spinner you've ever seen. I'd be like, and now we turn it. I don't know, something, it would never pass. But it's just bizarre that we've, as a society, trained people to hate the feminine so much. And it's the same with homophobia. Like, people aren't inherently homophobic. They don't really care what you're doing or having sex with. Like, no one actually has any kind of, like, obsession with thinking about gay sex. Maybe there are. I can't say no one. There's weird people out there. But we've been trained as a society, as you said, to hate gay people because it's related to the feminine. And it's very much men being afraid of being treated like a woman. And, like, that's their own self-worth. And that makes them terrified to interact with gay people because they'll get rubbed off on or be seen as not strong enough to stand up to that stereotype or that interaction with the feminine. But if it comes down to, like, you look at men being afraid of being hit on is literally just them being afraid to be treated like they treat other women.
That's what I was just about to say. Like, men being afraid of being hit on by men is actually just them being afraid of being treated how they treat women.
Yeah. It's odd. Like, nobody thought that I was straight growing up. Like I like nobody except for the girls that dated me, and then only for a little while, and then
Only for a little while.
that wasn't either. And I don't know. I was so entrenched in this toxic masculine culture while not passing well enough in it consistently that it wasn't until I was objectified by other gay men that I started to understand this dialogue better, which sounds crazy, and I wish that wasn't what I needed to learn. But that's what started. Like, I remember there was this guy who was a friend of mine who was just drinking too much that night, and he was very forward and explicit with me, and I was studying. I was like, hey, I'm not interested, and also I don't appreciate you treating me this way. And he said, stop being such a girl about it. And I remember that washing over me and going, oh, I feel like I understand now. And I wish that's not what it took. But that moment of being treated that way was my gateway to realizing so much of this shit and how problematic it was.
Should I start hitting on every straight man I see to make them have this realization?
Yes.
For God and country, yes.
Okay, I could do that.
For science.
I mean, I've always done that, like, in general, especially when I was drinking, but, like, one of my favorite thing to do is hit on straight guys. It's so dangerous, but I love it. It's like, I don't even hit on gay guys, you know? I only hit on straight guys. But it used to be worse when I was younger, but it was fun. Like, I had a long stretch where I used to work in Hollywood on the sidewalk. I used to, like, be, like, a sidewalk sign person. And there's nothing to do all day. You're just, like, supposed to interact with the tourists. So the way I interacted with the tourists is I would catcall them. Only the men, obviously. But they would get so offended. I'm like, what, bro? Like, you don't like being catcalled? Ain't that weird? Maybe you shouldn't come out in public with that cute ass.
Sorry. I know I shouldn't laugh, but I get catcalled so much that, like, there's a vindication.
Yeah,
in, like,
that's why I did it. I did it for all my
women.
women.
Hell yeah. Well, and, like, the other thing that I think, even in that moment of being like, oh, wow, this is what it feels like, I think it's also hard for, I would say for many men to register being physically enabled to defend yourself against the person that is aggressively coming onto you. And oftentimes that feels like force and violence are totally okay. Obviously, that's not every man that hits on you. Like, obviously, that's not every female to male dynamic, or even male to male, depending on size and strength differential. But it is very much a thing that women constantly think about. And that's why I carry a knife, pepper spray, and knuckles. It's because I'm strong, but, like, if some 6-foot guy that weighs 200 pounds wants to fuck with me, like, I'm not going to be able to fight him off without something.
No. Did I send you that video of the automatic taser gun thing?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I
have
also
to
have
send
a
it to
stun
you.
gun. I forgot.
Yeah. So, like, there's, like, a taser gun that's totally illegal everywhere, and I didn't know that they were illegal, but it's a literal, you know, just boo taser gun like the police use. And they're only $500. And I want one.
Only $500.
So I need you to know that if at any point in time you decide to make an Instagram photo of you just, like, holding up your knuckles like this, you're going to, like, blow up.
Aren't they illegal?
No, so it's not brass knuckles.
Okay.
They're legal. They're a little kitty cat, and then the two ears
with the pointy,
are sharp points.
Yeah.
So cute. I know that's not the one I'm supposed to think, but
that's
they
fine.
are. They're precious.
If I had to be stabbed by anything, it would be that.
I mean,
yeah, like, if you do, I'm gonna get you right in the eyes with them. But, like, I mean, that's the point, right? Is they make them sort of aesthetically appealing to women, so that women, I mean, not like we only want to carry things that are aesthetically appealing, but they were on my keychain. It looks like kind of a cute keychain, and then if I need them, I just stick my 2 middle fingers in them. But the fact of the matter is, like, women, I don't know a single, well, maybe like a few, that feel comfortable going for a walk by themselves after dark. And this is, like, something that a lot of men don't even think about. They take it for granted, just being out at night by themselves, because they aren't getting, they aren't receiving as much violence from people stronger than them on a regular basis. And it's not normalized by our society largely. Now, obviously, if you ask somebody, nobody's going to say that violence against women is okay, but the way that we put things into practice, including how rape claims are handled, domestic violence charges, like all of these things, it shows people that, like, yeah, it's okay, whatever.
Again,
For the
because
most part, not
as a
always.
whole, society has taught men to hate women. So why wouldn't it be
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
And this crosses back over into purity culture in a really complicated way, because there's this local pastor from my hometown named James McNeil, who I think is one of the clearest examples of toxic sexual ethics.
Someone just got called out.
I don't like him as a person. And
What up, James? Bitch. Just kidding.
Drew Offalo, where are you?
he
Oh my god.
I remember him doing a talk at a high school as like their graduation speech, and the rhetoric he used when I experienced him in college.
Immediately no.
He said, "You're supposed to wait for God's best," and what he meant was the way you think about romance is some people are not God's best and other people are God's best. And you are to quantify the people in front of you as being the best or not. And to tying that directly to immortality, to holiness, to all of these different things. And so when you take that and pair that with like this toxic masculine culture where like women are conquest, you have well, I'll speak for the man side, and I won't pretend to speak for the woman's side, other than that I fucking hate that they're teaching young women that if a man leaves you, it's because you weren't God's best. Are you fucking kidding me? So it's this back and forth bungee thing for men, where like I gotta conquer women, or I get to have sex to be a good man, but now I have to figure out if she's God's best. And if she's not, then I need to leave her immediately to go look for and be available for God's best. And while I'm waiting for God's best, I then need to make sure that I'm still being enough of a man by finding a woman. And it's this constant back and forth that is incredibly psychologically traumatic for men. And it constantly treats women as either a product handed to you by God as a blessing of your life, or a product handed to you by society to fuck. And that's
it. Yeah.
I
mean, that's how women are treated.
Yeah.
Like, it's even if you're within the church, then it's very much taught to you that way, right? So like, you are a gift to your husband, you are a helpmate to your husband, you are waiting for God to send you the man of your dreams, and while you do this, you should stay pure and holy and support your brothers and cause them not to stumble, and everything is your fault. And then if you do happen to find someone that you think is great, and say things get a little heated one night, okay? You thought this was God's match for some reason, and then he leaves you because you weren't God's best. Now, you are also being psychologically traumatized, because this is likely to happen more than just once.
Yeah.
And then you also think it's your fault.
Yeah.
You made the mistake. You caused him to stumble. And you think that, like, because you had sex with him or did some sexual act with him, that now he sees you as less than, or now you are less than, and you are damaged goods for your actual husband when he comes along.
It's because you're taught as an accessory, not a partner. I think that's what it is.
Yep.
You are supposed to hang on his side and be an accessory to his life, an accessory to his career, an accessory to his success. You're not supposed to be a partner in any of that. And that's where the disconnect comes in.
And like,
Yeah.
it's men are even taught to see women that they really like, that are willing to sleep with them before marriage, that they would be interested in marrying, as not marriage material. Like, that's so messed up. It's this, and this is one of the reasons why, like, I had my phase with this as well, so I'm not going to pretend like I wasn't part of the problem at different points in time, but like, men who were players when I was younger, like framing it like this, it's so much worse than it becomes being discussed in men's circles. Like, in men's circles, it's like, oh, he's just non-committal. It's like, no, he's willing to treat women like person enough until he can objectify them in the way he wants.
Yeah.
That's what's actually happening there. That's what's happening. It's just like, let me make you feel safe and secure enough that I can get what I want from you. And that's the entire conversation. And then gaslight the fuck out of you whenever you're just like, well, what was this? Like, what do you mean, what was this? Did you think this was something other than what it was? And make women feel absolutely crazy.
I think the best representation I've seen of that in just like modern times is from 13 Reasons Why, with the whole Bryce and Hannah dynamic. I think that's like, it was a really good summary of what I felt, at least observing this kind of interaction in high school, or even post high school, just in regular life. It's still very much I'm going to butter her up, sleep with her, and then gaslight her. It seems like a 1, 2, 3 punch that's very normal. And what I'm realizing in this conversation is that men as a whole have so much more damage from purity culture than I actually would have originally attributed to them. Because the way that purity culture has always made women very much feel like they are the target, or they are the reason for men to fall, etc.
They're the problem.
And while that's true, and while that is very much valid, I didn't realize how deep this thought and emotional manipulation and changing of like inner human dynamics that is involved on the male side. Because like if you really think about it, they're damaged in two different ways, but I feel like the men's isn't being talked about enough. And the only way we can start to fix men not growing up to be little assholes is by talking about this more and exposing like how these thought patterns are being quite literally trained into them, which changes their personality, which changes their interactions, which just makes them like camo and cars. The conversation needs to be bigger, and I hope that it happens as we move forward.
Well, I mean, even if you look at all this stuff about biblical manhood and biblical womanhood and like you're looking to the Bible, you're looking to something written thousands of years ago in a culture that is so vastly different from our own to see how you should treat women in the 21st century. Like, when you're looking at a book when slaves were still owned to tell you how to treat women today.
And like, what?
Good move.
Correct. And what to add insult to injury on that, the Bible presents so much healthier emotional range for men than men do in modern masculine culture. The amount of men that have passionate, caring relationships with their mothers, with their aunts, with their friends who are male, with protecting their families. Like, there is an emotional range in the Bible, no matter how archaic it is, that we don't even give men in modern day. So it's like they miss every opportunity to actually be good men that could be brought from the Bible, and then pick out the only regulated pieces of masculinity, which is don't be womanly, conquer, win, take, have. It's... And I want to make something very clear. The reason I'm just talking so passionately about the male's perspective isn't because I think the men have it worse. I'm not portraying that. I'm not talking about that. I don't think that. I have spent a lot of time unpacking how much this stuff has hurt me and people in my life.
Yeah.
I don't want it to sound like I think that men who are notoriously the oppressors in all these situations are in any way have it worse. I'm not saying.
No, I don't think it's coming off as men having it worse. I just think that, in the very much the same vein as hurt people, it's just a recognition that men do have trauma, and until they fix that trauma, they're going to continue to traumatize everyone else. And they have the power and the agency to do so. And because the way society has been structured, they do have a voice and a say in this matter of how things progress for the next generation in whatever space they're in. So until they recognize that they have trauma they need to unpack, it's going to just continue this cycle of damaging everyone around them.
Yeah. And something that I think, Andrew, I think it was you that brought it up, like, this part of this is a very recent development, because even in the 1800s, like, men had very close, intimate, but not sexual, perhaps, relationships with other men. Yeah. And that has been throughout history. And part of that was because women were seen as inferior, and so, you're only intellectually equal with other men. But I think what's lost is that, like, men are so afraid of being seen as gay or feminine that they have totally disconnected themselves from healthy relationships with other men where some of this discourse could take place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, if you're a toxic dude and you pair up with a toxic dude, like, all that's going to go back and forth is toxicity. But even if you go to other countries, like when I have been in like Europe and a couple of different countries, I know Europe's a continent, you see men much more affectionate with other men that are just their friends, right? And it's not weird. It's normal. And I remember thinking, like, man, I wish we could destigmatize a male emotional or male affection with other males, because I think it's really healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And women do it, right? Like, I'll hug my female friends or walk arm in arm with them or whatever. But men are afraid that if they even look sideways at another dude, that they're going to be accused of being gay. And apparently being gay is pretty much on par with being a woman as the worst thing you can be,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you think about insults that are thrown at young men and even adult men, what do they say? Don't be a pussy,
Yep.
Don't be a bitch, don't be a girl, like, don't be gay, right? Like, all of these things. And those are some of the kinder words.
And little do they know
I
that
would
gay men
say
are
those
superior.
words. Yeah, they are. And that women like them a whole lot better.
That is true.
And that we would prefer to sleep with them if they liked us. So
I mean, as a rule, anyone who is capable of taking a dick is wins. Just like that's just top notch.
Agreed.
That
That's
takes.
top notch.
I mean, that's a power move. Oh, anyways, moving on quickly. No, like as a kid, I remember like what you just said about like girls having affectionate relationships. I remember being so jealous of those relationships. And I remember in moments where I was brave enough to say something about it, it either became, oh, because you want to be with one of those girls, or what, are you gay? It was one of those two. It was either I am, like, even as a young kid, I was either sexualized in one direction or the other, just for wanting closeness with other people.
affection.
And
Yeah.
it's ridiculous.
It stunts little boys that turn into stunted males. Especially because with this like machismo, like toxic masculinity type thing, fathers aren't affectionate with their sons.
Right.
And often they're the opposite, where they're very physically abusive or somewhat physically abusive and not at all emotionally affectionate. And so there's this dynamic that's built between men that is violent.
Mm-hmm.
And then that violence plays out in other aspects. I mean, I know that my own dad, his dad was abusive to him, and guess what? He was abusive to us. Like, it's not an excuse, but I think we have to start seeing these different aspects in order to ever hope to heal them in any way, or to destigmatize them, or to find solutions for them. Because right now, men are taught that what is masculine effectively is a lot of violence and not a lot else.
Right. There's like a couple different groups where they focus on just like men bonding with other men and through touch and through just like emotional vulnerability. And I think there's a lot of them that are actually programs that have came out of the evangelical church, honestly enough, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that's like their clear answer to purity culture. I'm trying to think of a couple different organizations, but I don't know the names. I've just seen them on like This Is Life with Lisa Ling and different documentaries.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I can actually speak to some of that, but go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say, and like some of them are actually like court mandated as well for things like anger therapy and anger management. And it's essentially this group of 20 guys that just like stand in a circle, talk about things that are bothering them, actually unloading like emotional concerns that they have, and then at the end of it they all just like hug and switch partners through hugging for like 1 to 2 minutes at a time so that they can actually get some
like
healthy male touch.
Therapy?
Yeah,
It
but
is
group therapy in which the men have to
almost like
touch each
therapy.
other.
Yeah,
Because that's what they're missing. They're missing that closeness, the emotional intimacy, and then actually just being able to touch another man without it being weird.
Like, intimacy and affection without it having to be sexual.
Right.
And that will ultimately benefit their relationship with women, because I've certainly been in situations where I don't even want to touch the other person because I'm worried that if I show them any kind of affection, I'm going to then have to turn them down for sex.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then also you begin to feel like the only like purpose you serve to that man is sex.
Mhm.
And then you begin to feel devalued. Even if that's not the case, if a man doesn't know how to be affectionate in ways that aren't overtly sexual, that's how it will feel to women,
Mhm.
because it's like, okay, the only time he touches me is when he wants to have sex. And maybe in his brain, it's just that he doesn't know how to be affectionate without sex. But like, that's another disconnect that causes a lot of problems in relationships.
Well, if
Yep.
it often feels like, I mean, not to get too much into the weeds of my own stuff, like, but why not? I mean, I was taught my whole life, like, I remember moments throughout my life where I'd be sitting with a woman alone, and I was like, okay, at some point I'm supposed to make this sexual, like just like being taught that. And I remember like early on in my marriage, just sitting around and going, and we'd have this exact conversation where it's just like, I feel like the only touch is sexual, and I was just like, I've been taught this is the only one I'm supposed to give. And you're one of the first people that's ever, in a way that I heard,
Brought it up.
told me that you want more of me than as a sexual object. Like that. Like, I have felt the majority of my life like a sex object, and not like a person that gets to be.
Hard being hot, Andrew. Sorry.
That could have gotten so.
I can't see you, so I don't know if you're laughing.
I am
or
laughing.
Mad at
That
me.
could have gotten so emotionally difficult for me, and you caught the tension right when you needed to, and I really appreciate
good.
you for that.
Okay. Hey.
But no, it took
Here
me
for you.
forever. I mean, it took me forever to realize that I was liked as a person, and I was not an outlet.
Hmm.
And I was taught that that's what being a man is. That I'm supposed to be lonely. I'm supposed to work hard. I'm supposed to, be aggressive, and I'm supposed to be virile, and that's it. That's all I am. And I hope we are
Lonely, I bet.
It's lonely.
It's very lonely, because
Yeah.
today you can't say any of the things you feel for fear you will be treated like an inferior man.
Or a woman. Sorry.
Which why men probably have so much in terms of like depression. They probably have like these very high levels of depression, and it's not something they would ever seek help for either, because that would be
It's seen as feminine. And
admitting you have a problem and not just manning up.
Yeah.
Like, it's so sad that they're stuck in this like perpetual world of hurt that causes this cycle of hurt, and that they are not able to speak out on it. And that's depressing to hear about.
And next week we'll be able to talk about how all this shit show started, right? Like, where all this terrible patriarchal
history of why and who, so we know who to blame.
I'm gonna
Send
find the stuff.
knives to their
in all the
grave.
scene.
I'm gonna find that. Like, the Catholic sex police is one of my favorite things of church history. I gotta find that.
I'm writing that down too, so we can bring it up, just in case you forget.
I've heard about this. It's something, that's for sure.
Saturday Night Live needs to get a hold of that. Like, I think that could really just be something.
It could be something.
All right.
I guess that's our cue to wrap it up.
I think that's it. I think that's it for tonight, and until next week. But do we want to go over anything quick? Does anyone have announcements, any life updates, anything we should know?
I was recently on a couple episodes of other stuff. It was called, so I was on another podcast called Unbound Love, where these two Methodist pastors talk about interesting stuff. They're progressive Methodist pastors, and they wanted to talk about Deconstruction and Decon 2021, and that was really, really fun. Beyond that, I know we have some really fun episodes coming up in the near future that we have already signed up for with some guests that are coming on.
We're going to have Andrew Seidel on, I believe sometime in February.
Brains should not be that attractive. Can I just say?
I know. I know.
It's like,
It's
since
it's
when did
hard
smart get to be
being
hot?
smart.
I don't appreciate that.
It's always been hot to me. Sorry, Andrew. Uh, so I'm trying to think who else we have coming on. I can think of a few people we're inviting on. Um,
Can
but
can I tell about the one that I talked to both of you about?
oh yeah.
So
Totally
we are
forgot,
going to
sorry.
have Rocky, the director from the movie 1946, on, where we're going to talk about the movie, the mission behind the movie, the plan for it, and also some pieces that are really big for the film that are being added right now. We're going to talk about that on this on an episode coming up in the very near future.
Very near future.
So
Yeah.
be tuned in for that. It'll be probably, looking at the calendar, the next couple weeks from when this comes out, if I'm thinking about this correctly.
Yeah, I don't actually know when anything is ever coming
Nope.
out, so
It's really hard
I'll
to
just have to
pinpoint.
wait and see.
Speaking of coming out, there's this movie called 1946.
Oh man, it'll be fun. The future is bright. Yes.
If we can ever get it
If we
together.
could ever get it, or you just want to talk to us, you can always send us an email at Unholy Trinity 2021. That is Trinity without the T. So that's, well, I mean, without the T as we spell it. So it's TRINITY 2021 at gmail.com. Send us an email if you want to just like vent. That's cool. But Jesus, Red Sage, Heathen Queen, Queen of the Heathens. You know where we're at. But thank you for hanging out with us. And we'll
Yes.
talk to you next week
We love you.
with a history of purity culture.
Bye.
So long.
So long. Farewell. Adieu.